Have you finished?
I'm done now.
Right,
Ready.
fair
Thank
enough. Okay, so 3, 2... No. Okay. Okay, give me the nod.
Set the record button, press that.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Maison Frais. There's another way with Ellie Lacrosse. Create the lifestyle you want, keep the home you love, and protect your most valuable asset. Hello all. Today's chat is all about how exciting smart home technology and integrated spatial design can help to make life run a bit smoother and a bit easier in our homes. Smart home technology offers something for everyone, from improved security to saving energy and entertaining the whole family. And the big question today I'm going to be asking of my guests is, do you think we are ready to transform our relationships with our homes? And to help me with this big old question, I'd like to introduce my guests, Andy Baker from Baker Stone Systems Limited and Tom and Sophie from Dibujo Design Interiors. Andy Baker is an experienced AV, audiovisual and technological solutions specialist. His company helps share the knowledge within the design community to use smart tech at home or work to save time, energy and frustration whilst bringing the fun back to function. And Tom and Sophie are an up-and-coming design team based in South Yorkshire, specialising in creating interior environments that enhance people's use of their home and commercial spaces. So welcome everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, lovely. You didn't bring the sun with you, did you? And
No.
we are in June. It's supposed to be flaming June. I think it's just flaming wet, isn't it, really? So we're a little bit soggy in the studio today, but never mind. So I'm going to start with you, Andy. Hi. Right, I popped into my local Curry's store in Sheffield last week and I was struck by the layout of this store. Hadn't been in for several months. And right in the very entrance was this great big display displaying all things home smart techiness. Okay, it was a bit like a big altar to Google, Apple and Amazon. So the powers that be really are really determined to make our homes smart, aren't they?
They certainly are. It's not just the electrical stores like Curry's. You'll see it in Sainsbury's and Tesco's and everywhere. There's a smart home portion of the store where you can buy all sorts of things, like you say, Amazon, Google, Apple out there at the forefront.
Yeah.
But there are many others out there. Samsung have got their own smart things platforms.
Yeah.
And other smaller companies. One of the challenges is figuring out which ones are going to be there as we move on.
You and I are both old enough to remember the old Betamax and, the
Betamax and Philips and
Philips and VHS.
VHS. Exactly.
And the big, and people would say, oh, no, I've bought my Betamax and stuff, and people would go, oh, you've just wasted your money, man,
Yep.
And I feel we're on that tipping point now, aren't we? There's lots of Siris and Google My Home, and we've got an Alexa at home. My husband brought this other woman into our home at Christmas time without my say-so. He just produced this little home spy, which she's lulled me really, and she's been a bit of a seductress into being, kind of useful.
She's there when you need it.
She's there, but she's also listening to my every word.
Yeah, my wife loves talking to Alexa. She'll chat away to her. She'll set timers for the cooking and the baking. She'll set it to wake her up in the morning. She'll choose the radio station. She'll turn the lights on and off.
And don't you think that these big tech companies, they've used these as the foot in the door, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously what they're about. They're about selling more technology. Amazon were the first to market with voice recognition and everything.
Yeah.
And they're doing really well at it. But there are differences between that and Google's option. Google can answer deeper questions, can listen to multifaceted questions, whereas Alexa's still sort of a bit monosyllabic in a sense.
A bit sort of Tonto speak,
isn't
it?
But, are they making our home smarter? To a degree they are, but they're not bringing anything that revolutionary. I mean, voice control is great, but don't rely on it too much, because there are two real types of smart technology.
Okay.
There's smart technology that relies on the internet to work.
Right.
So you've got Alexa, Google, Siri, and all of those. If you haven't got an internet connection, those things just stop working because they're cloud-based.
Yeah.
Then you've got technology that you will have within your home that might be something as simple as a remote control for your TV is smart.
Yeah.
But a system within the home itself. So you make the home itself smart. So the home makes decisions.
Yeah.
So it knows when you're there. It puts the heating on when it's cold. It turns the lights on when it's getting dark.
And that is
and those sort of things.
Yeah.
Keeping that within the home and not relying on the cloud or anything else to do
and
it.
that is actually quite seductive for people, I think,
Yes.
isn't it? Because it is addressing some pain points, isn't it? And certainly as we get older, and Maison Frais, my demographic, my target is over 55s, and as we are aging, these voice activated controls, I think, are going to be, well, they're driving the technology, I think, aren't they?
They are indeed, but as I say, don't rely on them. If you're bedbound or something, don't rely on voice technology that relies on the cloud or an internet connection to work.
Right.
It's estimated that a really smart home can save 50,000 interactions with that house a year, whether that's opening and closing the curtains, turning the lights on and off, opening and closing the front door, turning the heating up or down, etc. 50,000 different things that the house can do for you. So it can make sure that you're warm, it can make sure that you're lit properly, it can communicate for you, it can give you voice commands and all these sort of things. But
and I think as you age, that is where it will really come into its own, isn't it? I mean, because obviously a young person, what's wrong with your legs and your arms?
yes.
It's the accessibility side of things.
It is,
isn't it?
definitely,
Yeah.
and I know, talking to people who work in sort of smart home technology, or the technologies behind it and the software and stuff, they do say the aging demographic is pushing the technology to be voice activated in all aspects, really. The challenge, I think, for an aging population is, at the moment, as I say, we're in a tipping point. They're very phobic about using this technology. I know if I gave my mum some sort of smart home system, tablet, whatever, she wouldn't have a clue. So it needs an awful lot of education, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and voice is being readily accepted as a control means.
I think it's intuitive, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't have
It's
that confusion between the operating system. Where's this button and that button?
I think once the initial education and the initial sit down and hand holding, and it's all kind of prepped and ready to go, then so long as it responds to somebody's, and they'll probably learn about the intonation of people's voices a bit more sophisticatedly in the future as well. I think that's another problem, isn't it? Yeah. And I know with Alexa, when you say something inappropriate, we get the stonewalling from, and we've all tested her out by swearing at her, and she's very prim and proper, and I did understand that,
But Google already recognises different people in the home. So you can say, hey Google, what's my diary for the day? And it will tell me what my diary is, different to what my wife's is, or my son, or whatever.
That
so
could be interesting between
Scary.
couples, couldn't it?
so it can do that. They've already got that level of. Now you see, I said, hey Google, and that made my phone
Now
listen
that
to
is the
me.
perfect example of
That's
the
quite-
little spies
Yes.
that are
That's
in
quite
the
scary.
always
That is
listening.
scary.
It is
Yeah.
listening to you all the time.
Yeah.
See, these
That's quite
these
scary.
home devices are it's a massive social experiment, isn't it, by these massive tech giants in Silicon Valley, and they are harvesting millions and millions of people's data.
Yeah.
And that's okay, so long as we understand what might be happening with it.
Yeah.
And we're already, your generation is starting to wake up to understand what you've given away for this convenience. We are old, Andy and I, no disrespect, are old enough to remember before anything digital, where you could go off leash, couldn't you? From a work point of view or a home point of view, you could be uncontactable in the truest sense of the word. And they are leashes. But we have kind of sold our sort of digital soul, really, haven't we? In terms of
data's the new currency.
it
Whoever
is,
can
and
hold the most
and
is-
the new technocrats in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley are going to be kingmakers, aren't they? Because they will shape the policy of governments in the future, won't
and
they?
that's already evident in what's happening in America and Brexit, things like that, isn't
scary.
it?
And all these dramas at the moment where I know Amazon.
Black Mirror.
Yeah, but Amazon and Netflix, they're bankrolled. These dramas are bankrolled by these tech companies.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've noticed in some of these really popular dramas, they're training the population to use these devices because they're definitely product placing, I think.
Yeah.
Oh,
aren't they?
most definitely. Just on the listening to the radio on the way here this morning, there was another big offering for a tech company, some company called Slack.
That's an unfortunate name.
which is purported to be the next big messaging platform to do away with email. And it was interesting to hear why it was worth so much money, apparently. But people are focusing on, my point is people are focusing on the technology and putting money into the technology because they see that's the future. And Slack's a little bit different to other things. It goes along with Uber and all these other things that are starting to use data as a way of making money and
That's
giving us better control.
That's very interesting because it's all linking to blockchain technologies.
Correct.
And I know Facebook, this very recently, have started to launch their Libra, their cryptocurrency, and they're being backed by companies like Uber.
By Uber and PayPal and
All the big
Vodafone, and you
players.
think, why would Vodafone want to be interested
Why wouldn't they?
in a digital currency? But
no, it's the way things are going, So it's all starting to be interlinked, definitely. So pulling this back then to people's homes. If I had, say, a client who wants to, whilst they're having their sort of family home renovated, they come along to somebody like yourself and they'll go, I want everything smart tech. Where would you suggest people invest first? Because they don't have to do it all at once, do they? Or do they? Or would you say sort of start small and build onto it?
They don't have to do everything all at once. The crucial thing I would say is make sure you get the right cables in place.
Right.
Very boring,
Yeah.
but make sure you get the right cables in place.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that everything can be wireless today, but we've all had the mobile phone conversation that drops out. We've all had the poor picture on the TV. The radio still crackles or goes off if it's DAB, etc. There's nothing more reliable than a piece of wire. So plan carefully and get the right cabling infrastructure in place. That's not an expensive item.
No.
There's nothing more expensive than the cable you forget. Because you're then chasing walls
and it's the remedial
ruining
stuff
the decor,
afterwards.
etc. So that would be my one major bit of advice: put the right cables in, so that you can make everything future friendly and add on the bits that you want.
So it really is. So if people are renovating or extending, that is the perfect time to start upgrading with the smart tech.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there are wireless solutions. So if you're not going to the lengths of replastering or knocking walls down or doing a complete renovation, then yes, use wireless solutions. But remember that there are some potential disadvantages isn't the right word, but I couldn't guarantee that it would work 100% of the time. With a wire I can, it might be 99.99%, but
and I know
wireless,
some things, if I'm thinking about my sort of property sort of hat on and as a landlord, there are some statutory things that I have to make sure with my properties that have to be wired in, hardwired in. So things like your safety features and your security features, they generally are the ones that have to be hot wired in, don't they?
That's right.
So the wireless situation. In your estimation, what kind of, what's the most important thing in terms of future proofing, or say let's age proof a property with smart tech? What's the thing what's the little checklist they should be thinking about?
Well, the major areas for incorporating smart tech are lighting control, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, HVAC, if you've got air conditioning these days, but definitely heating control. And then after that, I think you need to, if it's your forever home, you need to give serious consideration to future telehealth care and those sort of things. And then you start to think about the audio-visual aspects. How you're going to receive your entertainment now and in the future. So lighting is obviously vital for our lives, so we can see when it gets dark. But I think especially for an ageing population, heating is becoming more and more crucial, and combining that with energy control. So you might have solar, you might have ground source or air source heat pumps, and all this sort of thing. Linking all those things together so they work at their most efficient, because we tend to have less money available to later in life.
Well, now that's a moot point, because what I found in my research and with my prospects is I had assumed that people on a fixed income, etc., but there is an awful lot of baby boomers who are asset rich and they're sitting on a pile of money that's not doing particularly very much. And I think the return on investment of investing back in the house with this smart technology is a good thing.
I know my wife and I, we've invested in various things in our property. We put solar panels on the roof. Yes, it was a big outlay, but our plan was that would reduce our electricity bills for the rest of the time we lived there.
Sure.
That investment will have paid for itself within probably 4 or 5 years, and then anything we get back from it is a bonus.
It's a bonus, isn't it?
And it's reducing our electricity bills at the moment.
Yeah.
We've got an electric car, or a part electric car.
Yeah, I'm planning to get one of those
which
soon.
Is decreasing our carbon footprint, if you will, but it's also able to use the energy that we
That's right. You can
that
tap
we use,
into that. Yeah.
And by smart technology, you can link those things together so the car charges when the sun's shining, and it's not taking the stuff off the grid and these sort of things. So that sort of thing. But in the home, I mentioned heating because I know we've discussed before things like keeping floors warm, and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we can do stuff like movement detection. So if somebody's in a room, you can make sure that room's warm for a start.
Yeah.
And if movement stops or whatever, you can make sure that the room stays warm, that there's some sort of alert.
And do they kind of check back with people's kind of habits? So if they're normally walking about at a certain time of day and then they're not, does that kind of flag up something?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. But again, I keep coming up with this caveat: don't rely on one that's connected to the internet, because the internet does fail. At times.
I mean, certainly the underfloor heating. I mean, it was a shocker to me to learn from, people at Rotherham Hospital. Actually, it was a consultant at Rotherham Hospital, and he said, unfortunately, the biggest killer of seniors in their own home isn't the knock or fall per se. It's the hypothermia when they've been laying on that floor for more than 4 hours.
Yeah.
And then even when they're rescued, they've got a 10% chance of survival. So they often die a few days later in hospital.
Yep.
And I met a really lovely chap at a networking event earlier in the year. He was a first responder. And he made me laugh when he said that it's so prevalent around the sort of Sheffield and this part of South Yorkshire area because of the hills. They get these calls and they call it code nan down, which made me giggle. But then I thought, actually, that's rather sad, because it is so common that they've got a special code for it, and I say once the hips go or the femur goes, there's such massive trauma to the body. It's almost a killer in its own right.
We had an example at home just last week. My wife went out shopping, and she came back, and it was raining, and she heard this little voice from next door calling Hillary, and she went round, and our next door neighbour, who's in mid-70s, had fallen outside. She'd gone to put something in the recycling bin, had fallen, couldn't get up again. It was now absolutely chucking it down with rain. So we were around there with umbrellas and everything. And I know my wife had rang the ambulance, and they said, no, don't move her. But I got there and I thought, she's going to get too cold and wet if we don't move her.
She'll lose her
So
heat very
using the one
quickly.
arm that wasn't hurting, and we managed to pull her up and get her in the house. And when the ambulance came, I said, I hope we didn't do any damage by moving her, but they said, no, you did exactly the right thing. Get them warm, get them, luckily she's fine. She had broken her arm and everything, but it's so simple to...
Yeah, but that as I say, that simple fall, it created a break. But if your wife hadn't been there, if you hadn't been around the house, she could have been laid there.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to crawl up, because she wouldn't have lost all her strength, wouldn't she?
Yeah,
and like you say, she could have got hypothermia really quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it brought this whole sort of things home in a very real way. Now, smart technology, we couldn't have heated the floor outside, but maybe if there was something that was sensing, if she was out for too long or something like that.
I mean, even these wearable devices are getting a lot more aesthetic, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, they were kind of bulky, chunky things, and they are getting a little more wearable. I mean, I know it's slightly off the topic a bit, but my daughter lives in London. She never carries money. I mean, she's never got any money in her purse. I mean, that's why she has Bank of Mum here, obviously. But, you know, because in London, it's just tap, tap, tap with your Oyster card, whatever. But now she's got this piece of jewellery. It's like a proper bangle. It's just It just looks like a piece of jewellery. And she literally just goes like this, and this. Tap, 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 tap. Everywhere she goes in London. She's not actually had cash in her purse for weeks on end, which I find crazy.
Again, that's great until something goes wrong. You see these circumstances where banks are having trouble and people can't get on the tube, they can't pay for things, and they don't carry cash.
I will throw out a challenge to your generation and say, you know, at some point the national grid's going to go down. And what are you going to do?
Panic.
Collapse.
Because you will not have the wherewithal or the resilience to cope pre-digital.
We won't be able to ask Google, will we?
You won't be able to ask Google. You know, you'll have to pay for things. Well, I don't know if people have the ability to pay with cash in a few years' time. I think it's being phased out, frankly. You know?
I think it will. I got a free Starbucks coffee and muffin the other day because I turned up and all their systems had gone down.
Oh, no.
And
Happy days.
so I felt bad because I couldn't pay for this, but they said no, it's not. You know, so A, it was great customer service, but B, it just shows how we're how reliant we are. They couldn't even open the till.
Becoming vulnerable.
I offered them cash, and they said we've no idea how much cash to take from you.
I saw this drama program, and it showed the disintegration of our modern society. It happened that quickly. I mean, literally within 3 days.
Yeah.
People were starting to have, you know, psychotic episodes, and by the end of the week, people were killing each other. It was getting that bad.
Hopefully, it won't be that bad.
Well, but you know, I'm always a bit sort of my glass is half empty, so I'm always thinking of the worst that's going to happen in society, and I just think, well, at some point, this might happen, and we've got. I mean, look what happened in Brazil last week.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, actually, the
total
whole of South
blackout.
America.
Yeah.
Just the power went off.
The power outage, and it affected how many countries in South America? About half of South America.
It is quite sad how dependent we are on our power and technology now.
Yeah, it is.
Quite sad.
Okay. Okay, so Tom and Sophie. So thinking about how smart home technology can be incorporated into interior design plans. And when would our listeners use your services instead of an architect?
There's quite a lot of crossover between where we stand with architects. And generally, it would depend on the size of the project. So, I don't know, maybe you're looking at just making an open space in your house or a single-story extension. With a competent builder and a structural engineer, we would be able to work to create that sort of space. Once you're looking at larger alterations, maybe like 2-story extensions, things like that, then it's sort of encroaching into the architect zone.
In the architect zone.
Yeah, we try and have quite a free-flowing relationship with architects so that...
Better the devil you know.
Exactly, yeah. So that we've got an input on how the interior is going to work as well, whereas an architect might not always take into consideration these sort of issues that we're looking at the moment, you know.
So what would your definition be of an interior designer? Is it everything that happens inside the space?
I think it is, it's all your internal details, so your finishes, sort of the moods, any artwork, any personal items, and it's all about creating a space that reflects you and that you want to be in and that you enjoy being in. And that's where we come in.
I think a lot of people, as soon as you say interior designer, that the name Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen
Yeah.
springs
They do
to mind.
think cushions and curtains.
Cushions and curtains, this sort of foppish kind of dictatorial attitude.
Yeah.
But darling, it's got to be this shape.
Yeah, that's the negative connotation. It's all very elaborate. And
But that to me is interior decoration.
Yeah.
Your cushions and your curtains and your paint colours, whereas we do a lot more structural work.
It's about the function of the space.
Yeah, the layout of it and
space
space
planning
planning.
for us is a big one. You need to utilise all your space, and it needs
You'd
to work
be
for you.
surprised how many people don't. The amount of times I've walked into some very substantial family homes, and it's all very tastefully decorated, but it's that tasteful, it's bland, and it all seems to be on a certain horizontal level.
Yeah.
It's not personal.
It's not. Well, it's sort of personal to them, but they've made it that tasteful. It's almost it's removed their personality.
Yeah.
And also they've got acres and acres of unused space.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind that the square meterage cost of space in this country is several £100s per square metre. They're wasting so much space. People say, oh, it's the house isn't serving me anymore, we need to move because I've got a growing family. I'm like, you're not even using what you've got.
Or you get people who are just determined that they need an extension. We need more room. We've not got enough room.
Yeah.
And me and Tom will go in and we'll have a look round and we'll say, well, this room not being used. By
Utilise
moving
your
this
space that
wall,
you've got.
the space that you want.
Yeah.
And that saves you thousands of pounds
Definitely.
in sticking another extension on that. It's just going to make the unused space even more unusable.
Absolutely.
In a way.
Or we've come in at the point where people have already extended.
Yeah.
And they say, we've got this massive room and it's not working.
Yeah, we've got this massive
wasn't
room
the
and we're still all
considering-
huddled in one space.
Yeah, and
It was just
floor
the
of
idea
house
that
is dark.
more room equals better functionality, and it's not always the
No.
case. Within your current layout, if you move some walls, you might have a lot more space
I've been to
use.
some homes that are actually on plan look quite dinky, but actually they've gone up the walls.
Yeah.
They've used every available square inch very intelligently, and it makes walking through and living in that space just work.
Yeah.
And like you say, you've gone to big family homes that they just don't flow, do they? When you walk through, they don't
Sometimes
work.
it might be that space isn't what's wrong, it might be light. So knocking through from one room to another, depending on what the aspect is going to bring light in and just increase the feeling of space.
Yeah, and we've had this discussion, haven't we, Sophie? Because you are a lighting specialist, and I know, we've had this argument that, lighting is often, certainly with builders, it's a bit of an afterthought. Yeah. Or I've been down to B&Q and I thought this looked quite interesting. It's
Lovely grid.
Yeah, and but where's it going? And what's it supposed to be doing in this space?
I've been reading a book recently about sort of how to describe light to clients in a way that they'll understand it.
Oh, what's this?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to send it you.
You
It's a
little
really,
teaser.
really good book. But it does also stress that we don't actually know the long-term effects of artificial light because it's not been around long enough for us to know. So when me and Tom are designing a space, we really like the lighting to be the forefront of it. And we like it to be adjustable. You can take the levels up or down. You've got different circuits. And just so that you can sort of move your lighting in line with the natural light outside.
So it fits with our
body clocks.
And doesn't mess up our melatonin levels
No.
and stuff.
And so at night time, you're not sat with this rows and rows of spotlights on,
It's the old circadian rhythm, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're used to having a warm light in the morning when the sun's rising.
Yeah.
We see it's a reddy yellow, and same in the evening. But as the sun rises in the sky, it comes to it's a much bluer,
brighter,
it's a much bluer,
Yeah.
it's a much bluer light, and that can be emulated with today's lighting. So you get circadian
we have
lighting.
smart lighting systems.
So the smart lighting,
So
you
it's
can do that
exactly-
and bring that through. I didn't emphasise lighting because it's maybe not as crucial as some of the other things, but lighting does affect mood greatly.
It's about well-being.
Yeah,
in
because
this
it's a mental
space.
health element of it as well.
Absolutely, and I'm all about that because, as I say, once you get past a certain age, last week's podcast was about loneliness and depression as we age. And definitely our spaces can exacerbate that, or it can improve it. And I'm all about, with Maison Frais, working with clients to kind of elongate their well-being in their own home.
Yeah.
Because I know when people are forced out of their beloved homes, that's when a lot of mental health issues kick in, doesn't it?
Yeah, and loneliness obviously can go hand in hand with depression. And there was a study which looked at patients that had been admitted to hospital with depression, and those that were recovering in light, open rooms were generally discharged 30 days sooner than those that were left in dark rooms.
So
if you were depressed at home and you were sat in this dark room, it might never really get better because of the situation you're in.
And that's the problem we find ourselves with the social care plan that's failing badly because it was never incorporated in the National Health Service back in the 40s. It was always a standalone because, frankly, they weren't expecting people to live so long.
No.
So that's kind of, we've become a victim of our own success in the West because of our improved well-being and improved health care services. We are actually extending our life expectancy to the point where actually, we're using up lots of resources.
Yeah.
And the social change as well. We don't have that sort of multi-generational living now within one family.
Well, we haven't, but that trend is coming back in the UK.
It needs to.
It's pertinent to the UK because in other countries, it is very common for the generations to live together.
I'd love to live with my mum and dad.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I love my mother, but I'm quite happy to have the 2 hours distance between us, bless her heart. You know, she's my best friend on the phone, but within 10 minutes of being in a company,
I'd move in tomorrow if they asked me.
And my daughter has said, you know, I've said to her, you know, in the future, could you see ourselves living in a big old house, you know, me in one wing and the other? And the look that passed across her face was like, hell is going to freeze over first, you know.
Well, like you said, though, you have to have your own wings, don't you? Have your own space.
And these are the issues that have to be looked at if we're going down that road of maybe having a family living together. Like, how does it work? Do you have what would have been once a granny annex that's separate, or is it within one space and you have a social heart of the home?
I mean, what my daughter said to me, which is really an interesting insight, she said, well, I would be prepared, you know, in terms of costs and things like that. I can see the advantages of living with my nan. She said, but no disrespect to Nan's taste and decor. She said, I don't want to look like I'm living in an old person's home. Yeah. So the aesthetic of these spaces is very important, isn't it? You know?
It is, yeah.
It doesn't. It can be designed so there aren't loads of horrible plasticky grab rails everywhere and stuff. So it comes down to the interior design skills to look at the surfaces and surface choices that you choose. Anti-slip surfaces on floors as well as the smart tech under heating.
Yeah.
And that's kind of exciting. And I know I went to the Salone di Mobili show out in Milan earlier in the year, and coming back to the whole smart tech marrying with the interior design spaces, Google was there. Google had 3 rooms made up, all smart teched. But they looked drop dead, uber designed, gorgeous, and it created such a buzz. It was the second year they'd gone to Milan, and obviously their PR machine was just pumping out loads and loads of stuff. There were film cameras there and everything, and everybody was wanting to have a chat with the people from Google in these spaces. The queues were out of the door, you know. So what is it about this? I think there's a new science that's come aboard, isn't it? It's called neuroaesthetics.
Yeah.
So this marrying of technology and the structural physical spaces.
Yeah, it's like the relationship with the space. Having elements that are going to, again, improve that mental health, that are going to make life easier. And even in the interaction with the objects, which goes back to the layout and space planning. And being aware of, you know, if you've got this multi-generational living again, it might be a case that you have to widen doorways or hallways to make them accessible in the future. But it doesn't have to have a detrimental effect on the aesthetic of the interior.
It just looks a big open space, you know. I mean, there is an interesting bit of research done, and I think it was done by Stagecoach, you know, the bus and coach people. And they said up to about the age of 65, 70, most sort of aging baby boomers are engaged with the 21st century technology. They are on YouTube. They are using what they need to use to engage with family and friends, and even some people are still working at this age. I mean, we are working later as well, because companies need those skills and experiences, and because there's not enough younger people paying into the pension pot. Just I put it out there. It's drying up. You're not getting a state pension.
No.
And it's about, you know, how as we age we can harness the good things about this technology to be incorporated into our living spaces, because I don't think our houses are going to get bigger.
No.
So, I mean, you look at new home builds. We've got some new houses springing up like mushrooms on the outskirts of our village. I'm really sorry, but they're not for social housing.
No, they're not.
They are big executive style homes. But actually, when you walk around them, my bungalow's practically bigger in terms of the living space. And I've got acres of garden in comparison with these new builds. They're getting a good view, but they're not getting much garden.
No, developers just don't want to give land away. It's money, it's
how much you
opportunity.
can make off that.
So being able to have somebody in who understands about space, I think is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, you've got to make the most of what you've got.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. If people were wanting an interior designer to come to their homes, to come on board to kind of age-proof it, where would you encourage them to spend their money? Because some things are going to add to the return on investment. Some things are going to be neutral, and some things actually can take away from its actual market value, can't they? So what would you suggest the prime things to invest in?
I think one of the key things you have to assess is lifestyle.
Yeah.
What are they going to be choosing or hoping for when, I don't know, retirement or whatever follows comes? For me, it would always be the layout and the structure of the house to get that right for hopefully
the accessibility.
Accessibility is a big one, isn't it?
Because anything else you can do, you know, new bathroom, new floors, you can do that. Yeah. But accessibility, I think, is the important.
And it comes back down to this, like certainly in this area, South Yorkshire and certainly Sheffield, it's so hilly. Yeah. That trip hazard space from the kitchen to the garden
the thresholds.
The thresholds are a real pain point, aren't they? Literally.
Yeah, definitely.
And the front door as well, getting the garden in order for that sort of thing.
I mean, there's no point having the most perfectly usable house if you can't get in and out of it safely.
Absolutely. No. And it's you know, we are losing our mobility as we age. Even if you look after yourself. You know, I was talking to Andy before we came in here. I've had jip in my right knee for the last week.
Ouch.
And it came about from when I was your age, doing lots of running. I know it's hard to
I'm gonna
believe.
stop
I used to be a half marathon runner. I know it's hard to believe, but I was.
Yeah.
But I didn't wear proper footwear because we didn't 30 years ago. And that's really what I'm paying the price for now, is being so fit and healthy when I was in my 20s. Nobody tells you about that kind of thing, do they? So I can see that I'm going to have structural issues with some of my limbs as I age. And so I want my space to be future-proofed or age-proofed. I know you have issues with that word, don't you, Andy Baker? But I think in terms of property, it is semantics, and I think it is understood, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think age-proofing is also interesting use of words as well. So I'm that's why I've kind of downsized with my husband. But we've downsized from a big old farmhouse. I've spent my whole day cleaning bathrooms and toilets. We moved to a dormer bungalow, and then we've just spent the last 3 years adding rooms to it, which is kind of a bit ridiculous, you know. Because I think we actually gave up a lot of space for a view. Yeah. So I'm literally living through some of my clients' pain points at the minute by kind of all the stress and the mess by adding extra rooms to it, you know.
I think as well, bungalows are becoming a bit of a commodity now. There's fewer and fewer bungalows available.
There's not enough housing stock, is there?
Which is going to leave people in 2-story houses. Again, accessibility issues. You've got bad hips, knees, things like that.
And I have to say, in terms of the accessibility from an investor's point of view, when we've seen houses that have come up for probate, you know, when people have actually died, the trend has been that people kind of, you know, forget about maintaining their spaces and they don't invest in maintaining and looking at the decor and its accessibility. For maybe 20, 30 years, they've not decorated that space. Yeah. And then the family will put this on the market and they're expecting it at market value. And I go, sorry. You know, I have literally got to spend 20, 30 grand updating this property to appeal to a younger family. Like a new bathroom, new kitchen.
And if things have been left for 20 years, then you could be looking at structural problems, damp issues like that.
So actually investing in some interior design, some smart home tech is actually going to help people in the future maintain the market value of their properties.
And you get it right first time when you're getting help from somebody else. You don't do it and then
it's
go,
not Mr. Mr. Bodger.
Oh dear, that's wrong.
And I think that's one of the key things you say about future-proofing as well. It's hopefully a one-time thing. You don't want to be going down the route, like you said with Andy, where you might install 1 or 2 items and then in 5 or 10 years you've then got plaster dust everywhere again. If you can get it out of the way in one, it's always a lot better.
And like you're saying, hardwiring everything as much as you can. Prepare for it.
We recently went through this with my mum when she passed away. Her house hadn't been well maintained. It wasn't falling down or anything. She'd done, she got the local handyman round to do various things, and you looked at them and you thought, all right, it's fine, but it wasn't great. And we didn't quite reach market value by any means. But luckily the house was still structurally sound and in a very good location. So
I mean, you were lucky it was in a good location.
But you can see, you can certainly see that happening.
And I've seen reports that have said that refurbishing and renovating the existing 19th century housing stock is going to be a big thing over the next 5 to 15 years. Because with the best will in the world, developers are not going to be able to produce enough housing stock for people to downsize into. And the other trend that I've seen coming through, which was surprising, but I can see it, is this age group are the owner occupiers generally. We've been lucky enough to be able to get onto the property market. But there's a lot of younger baby boomers like myself and a little bit older that are thinking, you know what, I'm not going to have a mortgage millstone around my neck. I'm going to cash in. I'm going to get somewhere to rent, and I'm going to have a great old time.
Yeah.
And spend the kids' inheritance. My daughter's looking at me like, don't do that, mummy. I'm relying on you. Yeah. So in terms of city centre locations and town centre locations, developers are starting to get it. They're starting to offer these beautiful contemporary home spaces, apartment living, where they don't have to have loads of gardens because physically they don't want to get involved in that. They're in the thick of it with all the theatres and all the cultural stuff. And I'm thinking actually this as an alternative, as a niche, might just be the saviour of our town centres and cities. Get it back to sort of a more community feel.
Traditionally, you might have moved out of the city, to the outskirts or even to the country.
Yeah.
But these transport routes are leaving now. The public transport's dying out. You might not have the ability to drive. So getting back into the city centre where you've got the amenities and the accessibility to shops and banks, it's going to become a bigger thing.
I think it's going to be a bigger thing. And me personally, I've lived in some big cities around the world and I kind of like it. But my husband hates it. Yeah. So whilst he's still alive, bless his heart, and I hope he lives forever, darling, if you're listening, we're not going to live in a city. But if anything ever happened to him, I could see myself living out in Barcelona quick as you like, and I'd love it.
And like you say, getting rid of that mortgage that's hanging around your neck and just having that freedom that you could rent, and then you think, I've had enough of this. It's time to go. It's time to go somewhere for 6 months, 12 months, and then I can come back and start again.
Absolutely. And, you're the same age as my daughter. You're in your sort of late 20s and that. And, she's even considering the idea that she's probably never going to own a home.
Yeah.
And she wants these experiences in life.
Yeah.
So I keep saying, well, you need to be putting some aside for a mortgage in the future. And she looks at me like I'm a Martian. She goes, well, you're going to help me out, aren't you? And I'm like, well, hang on a second, darling,
But I think that is sort of the difference in generations. Like my grandma's generation and our parents, it's all about stuff. It's all about your own stuff. Like they've got, they downsized as well, would you believe? But the house is full of stuff still. Whereas our generation, life to us is more about experiences.
Definitely.
Hanging out with your friends, creating a great life for yourself. And unfortunately, we forget about stuff.
Yeah, and the thing is, in the West, we all have far too much stuff.
Yeah.
Just stuff.
We know decluttering companies that are really busy at the moment because I read this really funny article. It said, millennials don't want your shit. Excuse the French. We hold on to things and we're like, we'll just keep that for when she settles down.
Yeah.
And my daughter looks at me like, Mum, I don't even like it.
But it's the sort of memory that you place within that object that you're holding on to, not the object itself.
And the values are being redirected, I think, in the new generations. Like in the past, you'd hold on to your family silverware or crockery and plates, things like that, but there just isn't the value in that anymore.
It isn't. I mean, the market's really dropping out of antiques, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And yet, maybe not antiques, but certainly, this is kind of weird for me because upcycling is in the zeitgeist, isn't it? We're all becoming very kind of conscious about how we're stuffed up the planet and how it's kind of
trying to reduce waste.
To reduce waste, and I'm a great upcycler. I find it a happy kind of de-stressing activity, hobby for me, because I saw so much going into landfill and into skips when we were renovating houses, and it would break my heart.
It does,
And it was like even leather sofas are going into landfill. I'm like, what? You can use the leather easily.
Yeah.
Or even
take
paint
it to a charity shop or
take
something.
it to a charity shop.
Yeah.
And I know my daughter's more into kind of like make, do and mend. So it's almost coming full circle from the kind of early baby boom generation when they were.
But we're very like that when we do a scheme for somebody. We look to the future. We make sure that the items that we specify will live a long time.
Fabulous.
And they will last. Because
I think it's being responsible.
It is.
It?
You need to spend that little bit more just to get the quality.
And I know there's talking to one or two architect pals of mine. There is a sort of what they call a green book, like a green specifier book.
Yeah.
Because I was asking once for some help with a project of mine where they were very eco kind of sensitive, and they wanted some sort of screens as room dividers, and they said we don't want any plastics, no plastic screens, whatever. I was like, what can we use? And this architect friend of mine said, well, have you thought about bamboo? Bamboo and its many guises and its reconfiguration stuff, and they were so translucent and beautiful. They almost look like the Japanese sort of paper screens.
Well, it's almost like you said as well, going back to the neuroaesthetic. Something like bamboo is a natural material. Whether you notice it or not, your brain will make that connection. So we were saying it's very important, we think, to have plants. Just have a bit of nature within your house, because without you knowing it, that's giving you a stimulus. It's giving you a boost.
It is,
and it's making your mental health.
Absolutely, better. and it's that link between the bio
life,
isn't it?
You
know? But I had a big debate recently on social media about how you could use faux planting with some of the interior schemes, and there were two camps.
I'm not totally against that though, because I kill plants.
There were two camps, and they were saying, "Oh my God, that's so unhealthy for you." But I'm like, really? Can't you just shove a few in, like hair extensions, just to
every
bulk
now
it
and
out
then?
a little
I
bit?
think so. And because if you're anything like me at keeping plants alive, then it is good to have some that always look healthy.
My plants thrive on neglect.
They've got a few live ones.
They're either drowned or roasted, and I have to try and find plants, mostly cacti, that kind of.
We've got loads of succulents, and they've only survived because you water them once a week.
But then going with live plants, you've obviously got the health benefits of that, purifying the air and things.
Definitely.
So again, people with respiratory problems, it could be a little benefit of
And
that,
I
and take the
did-
pollution out.
That's right, and I did notice an article quite a long time ago that said if you put certain types of plants near your electrical equipment as well, they kind of absorb that electromagnetism, which can mess up with your hormones and bits and pieces. So my living room is actually quite green. I've actually got quite a lot of planting in there.
Are they real?
They are 90% real.
Good.
I've got a couple of strategically placed faux plants to bulk up kind of bare spaces. But my husband hates it if I go away for a weekend and he's in charge of watering.
Looking after the plants.
And we've got some of these, the hanging basket things.
Yeah.
It's a big trend, isn't it, from IKEA, all these macrame.
Yeah.
We remember the 70s, the
Macrame,
macrame pots hanging, everywhere. So they're back in fashion. And he never, I keep telling him to take them down when he waters them.
Just over the carpet.
Over the telly, over all the electrical stuff, and it's dripping, and he did it sneakily. And I came home and we were watching some Netflix program. And suddenly, there was a lamp literally directly underneath this, and it blew a bulb.
Oh no!
And it exploded. I mean, it really went bang, And I'm like, what the hell? And the look on my husband's face was like a naughty child. Like he went, oh, well, I watered the spider plant this morning. I'm like, you
Watered the lamp.
Yeah, I watered the lamp. Yeah, basically. Yeah. So in terms of an aging population, we've covered about whether what to kind of aim at in terms of our smart tech and our spaces and things like that. So do you think, if we go back to our original question, do you think we're ready to transform our relationships with our home? I mean, what is our relationship with our home generally?
It's different, isn't it, for each person?
Yeah,
Different
I think
for each lifestyle.
you can see some people are embracing the thing like we said about bringing Alexa in and Siri. And then there's the skeptics on the other side.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
as it becomes more common, I think that integration is going to grow probably.
Yeah. Do you ever think, because we've got the third spaces, haven't we, with the coffee shops, the Costas, and these are kind of in between home and office, aren't they? These sort of betweeny spaces. Do you think our home could ever be like that? Do you think we're ever ready for to help solve the housing crisis? Because there's not enough people, who've got their own homes and stuff. Do you think we're ready, or will we ever be ready to open up part of our homes to be more communal? Or I'm just throwing it out there.
It's a nice idea, isn't it? I quite like that idea, but I'm not 100% sure that it's...
Part of me feels it will only start to become something that happens when the issue is really pushed. So if this crisis continues where people can't afford a home, and they're still staying at home with mum and dad till 30, 35, then the issue might be pushed that, hang on, we're never going to be able to get a mortgage here. How do we look at expanding the family home and sort of being able to bring everything together?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it will be external influences that will make it so problematic for you to physically own your own home. I mean, it's a political decision, that, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, it was
really
a political decision to sell off most of the public housing stock in this country.
Yep.
I mean, under Thatcher, love or loathe.
I mean, me and Tom say it's forever on the news, isn't it, that there's not enough housing, there's a lack of housing.
Affordable housing.
And we say
Affordable
it's there's not a lot. You don't need to build more houses. There are enough houses out there. They're just not the right spec or right price for a first-time buyer.
Yeah.
So maybe look at the houses that are sort of derelict that need a bit of attention.
That's shocking how many people own a home and don't actually use
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
But, I mean, you can walk down any street in Britain and there'll be a couple of houses, won't there, that have been neglected. And you think, how can you just do that? How can you just allow your asset to kind of moulder?
Yeah.
Definitely.
And even on the newer housing developments, if they're saying first-time buyers, you might be aiming at a sort of 25-year-old to 30-year-old. Then these are couples that are probably looking to have a family home. But the new houses just aren't big enough. You haven't got that nice spacious garden to play in or large rooms for kids. So they're almost not appropriate housing. So then they almost become void in what the point of them is.
Yeah. Which is why, coming back to this idea, this trend that the 19th century housing stock,
the larger
with the largest square footages or square meterages, actually have got roof spaces. Have actually, maybe got basements.
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of shocked recently when I went on the sort of planning portals with the government, and the amount of planning applications that have gone in the Sheffield area to do basement conversions. And actually it's actually cheaper to do a basement conversion than it is a loft conversion.
And I think a lot of the cases, maybe in the sort of 90s and noughties, the attic conversion was really pushed. So they've already expanded into that space and they're looking elsewhere. They might already have a single story extension to the back. Then again, where can we go?
Or they've had cowboy builders in and they've gone up into the loft, but it's not been signed off properly, or with building control.
It's not a bedroom.
And it can't be marketed as a bedroom, can it? It's kind of a useful space for them whilst they're living there, but they can't then market it as an extra room.
Yeah. But I think we're seeing, I'd say, above 50% of the clients that we get from Sheffield are the ones that are investing in these mid-century properties, early 19,
They
1900s.
they are terrific properties because you've got the space to really transform it, and it's about transforming space, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the other thing is about in terms of going up or down, it's affordability, isn't it? And it's about, if you've got a certain pot of money, where would you invest to make that property age-proof?
Yeah.
And I think people have looked to London, where everywhere you go in London, they're tunnelling, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, how annoying for a neighbour if you're not going down. Shaking your foundations to the roots, isn't it? And the attendant mess and stress and everything. I mean, London's a special case. I mean, London isn't Britain.
You kind of need to look at London as its own.
It's its own,
entity.
Entity, and there's been a lot of gentrification in London. I know where my daughter lives, on the edge of the East End. It isn't like the East End I ever remember.
No. I mean, I was born in the East End. But
No.
London, we talk about it as a big mass, and it's so different. I mean, we regularly work in central London, Mayfair, and all those places, and a lot of what we talk about is being done there. But you've only got to go a few miles to another bit of London, and it's not
totally
being done.
different.
Yeah, and it's
Totally
a constant
different.
evolution, isn't it? Like you say, these places become gentrified, and then there has to be a new place that's affordable and is going through the same process, and it just moves around. Essentially.
But you see, even if we look at Sheffield, there are gentrified areas of Sheffield as well, and look at the hipster areas that used to be very industrial.
No, there's definitely that's happening everywhere. But to come back to your question, I'm going to answer it about will homes become between spaces? I think they potentially will.
Yeah.
But one of the things I often do is look at transport and our cars to see what's coming along, because a lot of new technology comes into cars first, believe it or not.
Yeah, I believe that.
Doesn't surprise me.
And I was thinking, driving up here, how one of the ways we're going to combat loneliness and this sort of thing is going to be self-driving cars. The older person's going to get out there.
That's so scary.
It's going to go out there and get in a car. They're not going to need to own the car. They can then go where they like, and this sort of thing. The technology always that my car, if I take my hands off the steering wheel, it'll still steer, but after 30 seconds, it will say, "Put your hands back on the steering wheel." It'll keep between the white lines. It'll keep to the right speed. and all these sort of things. The technology is there to do a lot of this stuff. There's got to be the willingness to adopt to some of this technology. Some people are willing to adopt to technology.
Well, they'll always be first adopters, won't they?
You know, I look at my mother and my mother-in-law as two people of about the same age. Both have now passed away. My mum was able to do email and this sort of thing, and she could use the internet. My mother-in-law wasn't even slightly interested in trying to do it, never had a mobile phone, etc. So it is a difference in attitude with people.
It's a difference in attitudes. It's a difference between the generations as well. And I say I am a young baby boomer. My mum is a senior baby boomer. But in terms of culture, there's a gulf. There's a gulf between a 55-year-old and a nearly 80-year-old. You know,
absolutely.
there's absolutely difference. You know, and it's really about, in terms of our businesses and what we can offer our target markets as well. It's it's understanding, and it's very niche. It's understanding you're getting with the adopters, the early adopters, with the younger end of the baby boom.
Yeah.
But I think that phobia is less, as you say, there's a big gap between that 80-year-old and 55, whereas someone like yourself who has worked through these sort of electronic changes, you know, computers coming through and everything else that's followed. So there isn't sort of that phobia of it's a weird machine that I don't quite understand.
But in terms of, I remember when my daughter was 3, and we, you know, it was all Windows then, before Apple really came to the fore. And I remember she sort of hitched herself onto my lap, and I was doing something on the PC. And I said, "Oh, darling, do you want to break? Do you want to put your little," it was like floppy disk or something then, you know. She go, and she just turned around to me. She said, "Oh, it's okay, Mummy. I know how to exit from Windows." I'm like, "You're on your own, kid. Right? You've clearly got this already. You know." It's
so scary now when you've got friends with kids who are maybe 2 or 3, and they can pick the iPad up and go onto YouTube.
Because it's so intuitive, isn't it? It's just tap, 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 and they learn by doing, don't they? So,
and that comes back to sort of the systems that Andy works with, whether it's the sort of touch screens for your lighting and things like that. They need to be intuitive for people to really adapt and to accept them into the home.
I think
one of the things we concentrate on when we're doing like a whole home thing is, it's great, all this technology we've got there, but it's got to be usable by the person. And they don't need to have an instruction book every time they approach something. It's got to be intuitive is a great word.
I'm not one for you know, I have got some quite masculine traits actually, because I never look at a manual.
Press all the buttons and see what happens.
If it doesn't blow up, it's all right, it's working, you know. So.
And then again, with the integration with your voice control, it might be easier if someone could sit in the living room and just say, dim the lights to 50%. Instead of having to use a pad or a control to do that.
It's already happening. It's already happening.
But I like that with the sort of smart technology is sort of inputting your scenes. So you just press a button and it goes into like relax mode.
You might have
press
a
a button and it
dial.
goes into party mode.
But you don't have to press the button. You know,
you can say
it knows that you regularly watch the news at 6 o'clock every evening, so it turns the TV on, puts it on whatever your choice of news program is, dims the lights a bit. Closes the curtains if necessary, and away you go.
You see, I like the idea of getting back to the sort of internal spaces. It's how you can change the function of a room very quickly with maybe some help from smart tech. So maybe some virtual screens can be there. Suddenly your wall becomes like a projector, or suddenly it becomes a view of a beautiful scene in terms of, you know, your wellness and your holistic therapy. Suddenly you could have some nice smells coming down from the room sense, and the lights are dimmed, and then suddenly you've got this lovely green scene, and you can't be living in the middle of the city, but suddenly you feel like you're in the middle of a forest, which is immediately going to relax you a little bit.
And that could then link up to sort of your, like you say, audio and visual system, so it is playing a forest soundtrack coming through. So it's almost like a therapy room more than you know, so you can relax within that space. And like you say, it's finding that multifunctionality within a space, because you might be limited on what you can do within that space. So
and also the idea that, I mean, like we were going back to the idea of the bungalow, which is a very sort of post-war kind of mechanism, wasn't it, really, sort of like to shove our old people in, you know, to be single living. But actually, as we're aging, we are needing carers and maybe some domiciliary care to come to our homes. And so that developers are starting to think that actually the 1-bedroom bungalow isn't going to suffice in the 21st century. It's got to be at least 2 bedrooms because you might have family or carers actually sleeping over. And the other thing, going back to this idea of lifts and accessibility to the house, I find a lot of people maybe have got big family homes, say like Hatton Dornish, Sheffield, beautiful views and everything, lovely home, but they're only living or existing in 1 or 2 rooms. They're shuffling around on the ground floor, and they probably haven't seen their upper levels for, in one case, it was over 2 years. And all that space just empty. And then they tried to put in a stair lift, which is, I'm sorry, pigging ugly. Secondly, it doesn't always address the accessibility problems, because if you've got mobility problems, what do you do when you get to the top?
And you've got to get up.
And you've got to get up. Actually, there have been cases, tragic cases, where people have been unsteady on their feet. They've got to the upper levels, and then they've literally tripped as they've got out of this thing and broken their necks on the way down. And as an investor, I've walked into properties as probates and stuff, and I've seen a stair lift, and my heart sinks, because I think, I've got to put in a new staircase to get that thing out. Is going to destroy the staircase. So that's 10 grand out the window straight away.
But then it's the case that if you're maybe in your 50s and you're thinking, I'm going to stay in this home for the next 30 years, like say, stair lifts, they're never going to look nice, are they? But if you've got maybe a remote part of the house where you could get an accessibility lift in there.
Definitely, and punch through to the upper
and you can avoid these issues of having to trip, or worst case scenario, if you're in a wheelchair. There's no problem then going forward. You can straighten the lift and you're upstairs and things like that. Obviously, resale value, but if you're looking at an investment for the long term,
and why wouldn't younger families take advantage of that anyway? And who knows what might happen in your life? I mean, you can go from being mobile to having an accident and being disabled at a flick of a switch. You know, who knows how our life's going to play out? And if your home can be adaptable, you know, I don't think it's money that's going to be wasted, to be honest with you. Okay, so I think we've answered our question very nicely. I want to thank each of you for coming onto my show today.
Thanks for having us.
I'm sure we'll do this again, and we'll move the debate on a bit further. But for today, thank you very much. And all your links will be available from the podcast in the future. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.